pals, it's me, Wilma Fingerdoo, with another episode of That's So Wilma, the series designed to help you learn to sew, even if you have no interest in competing on RuPaul's Drag Race. But if you are, these tutorials won't hurt. I mean, 16 seasons and we still get contestants who don't know what's what the minute they sit behind a sewing machine? Seriously! That changes today because our project is something that every wardrobe can benefit from. Gloves! Not only are gloves a great accessory to any outfit, they're fairly easy to make once you know how, and you usually have more than enough fabric left over from most sewing projects to whip up a pair, so waste not, want not. Now, I think we can all agree that gloves are a lifesaver if you're a drag queen. No time for a manicure? Cover those paws with a pair of gloves. Maybe your look demands fingernails. Then, how do you change costumes and wigs without a dresser? You can't go through life like Dolly Parton, no matter how hard you try. So why not glue some nails on a pair of gloves so you can take them off easily instead? Another reason I thought this was a good project is because gloves are almost impossible to find in drag queen sizes, especially if you have big old man hands like me. And let's be honest, ladies, having big old man hands isn't limited to a Y chromosome. Am I right? Now, to create the pattern for this project, we're going to need some pattern paper, natch, paper scissors, a pen or pencil, a ruler, and a measuring tape. For our gloves themselves, we're going to need fabric scissors, dressmaking pins, and a good two-way stretch fabric like lycra or spandex. Anything will do as long as it stretches in two directions. And by that, I mean left and right and up and down. Some refer to this as four-way stretch, but really, it's just two directions, up, down, and across. Of course, you can use fabric that only stretches in one direction, but it becomes tricky, so let's stick to the two-way stretch for now. Speaking of two ways, I'm also going to show you two ways to make gloves. One way is very quick and easy to whip up in a pinch for some last-minute glamour. This method is perfect for Halloween costumes because it's fast and uses less fabric. The other way, it's a little more involved, takes longer to make, but ultimately fits better and looks more professional. What I'm saying is it depends on what kind of queen you are. Fast and easy or complex and involved? Guess which one I am. So let's start with the easy version. First, we need to trace our hand. It doesn't matter which hand, they're both the same more or less, unless you've been cursed by Jesus. I don't know your life. So we take some paper, place our hand on it, spread our fingers out, and trace it like we're back in kindergarten drawing turkeys for Thanksgiving. Make sure your fingers are spaced out evenly and that the pen is as perpendicular to the paper as possible. If the pen angles under or away from your hand, your pattern will end up being too big or too small. You also want to trace up your arm as far as you want gloves to go. Most gloves end just above the wrist. Evening gloves go to the elbow, and opera gloves go right up to the armpit. You also want to measure around your wrist and the point on your arm where your glove is going to end. Because this is one side of the pattern, you want to divide your measurements in half. As a rule of thumb, you want the pattern to be a touch smaller than your arm circumference so that it fits snugly. Personally, I like to make this measurement about a ½ inch smaller. After you've done that, you want to shorten your fingers on the pattern by 3/4 of an inch. This is because the fabric stretches and you don't want the fabric to end up longer than your finger. Once that's done, add a 1/4 inch seam allowance around the whole pattern except at the bottom where you will need ½ inch for the hem. Now, I want to take a minute and send my love and appreciation to Amy Anderson, who sent me this fabulous clear ruler from my Amazon wish list for my birthday. If you don't have one of these time savers, you can absolutely use a regular ruler. I just find adding seam allowance goes quicker with a clear ruler. I love you, Amy! Once that's all done, cut out the pattern and place it on the fabric. Because Pride is a-comin', I've decided to use this rainbow fabric. As you can see, it stretches in both directions. But because it's striped, I didn't want my fingers to look like lifesavers, so I'm going to cut this pattern on the diagonal. But before I start pinning the pattern in place, I want to make sure that the fabric stripes match. If you find your fabric fussy, pinning the two pieces of fabric together will help to ensure that your pattern matches. Next, using some dress pins, because they're finer and won't leave big holes in the fabric, we'll pin the pattern to the fabric. Now, I'm going to cut out both pair at the same time. And by this, I mean I'm going to have 4 layers of fabric, 2 sets right sides together. Now that your gloves are cut, you'll see that there's a big discrepancy between where you cut the paper and where you're supposed to sew the gloves together. So to make sure we sew the fabric to the proper length, we're going to take some tracing paper and place it under the pattern on the top layer of the fabric and the bottom layer. You only need to mark 2 layers because we're sewing 2 gloves. We'll only be able to see one side while we're sewing. Now, trace the sewing line just at the bottom of each finger. Shout out once again to Amy, who sent this tracing paper with the ruler. You're a lifesaver, Amy, seriously. Mwah! Now, pin the gloves right side together, making sure you have a layer with the stitch line marked for each glove. Also, take care to match up the diagonal lines along the sides of the wrist and arms so your pattern chevrons. Now listen carefully. I'm about to save you some time and heartache here. Because we're using stretch fabric, we need to have a ballpoint needle in the sewing machine. Stretch fabrics are mostly always knitted, and because of that, a regular needle won't go through knitted fabric the way it would with a woven one. The top thread won't catch with the bobbin thread. This is why on Drag Race, when you see a queen having issues with their machine not sewing, it's because they're using the wrong needle on the fabric. Seriously. Why does this work? I have no idea. It doesn't make sense to me. You'd think a sharp pointy needle would have no problem going through anything. But it does. It's like knitted fabric is a sharp needle's kryptonite. Now we're good to go. Just sew the gloves right sides together at 1/4 inch using the stretch stitch on your sewing machine. Here's a tip. What do you do if you don't have a stretch stitch on your sewing machine? Well, you can totally use a regular stitch, but when you're done, pull the fingers, you heard me, until you feel the thread break. Then backstitch over that point where the thread broke and your stitches should hold. Do this for every finger and then along the arm of the glove. This is a good trick to use on any outfit that's stretchy. I'm not sure why it works. I'm not a scientist. Once you've sewn the 2 sides together, you want to hem the glove by folding the edge down twice at 1/4 inch, which will end up being 1/2 inch. Make sure to open up your seams so that the hem isn't bulky. Now, I know it looks like we're done, but we're not. There's one final step, clipping and trimming the seam allowance. If we don't do this, you won't be able to turn the gloves inside out to wear them. The seam allowance between the fingers will actually keep the fabric from turning inside out. So we need to clip between the fingers to the point where the stitches turn up for the next finger. Not all the way, but as close as you can get without the fabric separating. We also want to trim away at least half of the seam allowance around the fingertips. This will keep them from looking lumpy and odd. Once they're turned inside out, they're ready to wear. Now, because of how these gloves are made, there's no left or right, unless you glue nails to them. But for the most part, that's all there is to it. Now this pair took me about an hour to make, pattern included. But here's why I'm not a huge fan of this style. There's still some fit issues between the fingers, and because the thumb is cut on the side of the glove, you end up with a lot of room on the palm, and it makes the glove look like it doesn't fit. But for a performance or a Halloween costume, or even a quick strut down a red carpet, this method is totally fine. Get it? Got it? Good. Now it's time to step up our glove game. This second method involves an inset thumb and a gusset along the fingers. This is closer to the classic method of sewing gloves. Remember, gloves were originally made of leather, which has no stretch whatsoever, so these allowances have to be applied to help them fit. Now, even though we're using a stretch fabric, these little additions will help the glove fit better. It also makes them look expensive. Ooh. Here's how we do it. Start off like before by tracing your hand, but in this case, don't spread out your fingers. You want them together like a karate chop with the thumb sticking straight out. Moving your fingers out of the way so you can trace down the length of each one. With a ruler or measuring tape, draw a straight line along your index finger, ignoring your thumb for now. This edge needs to be straight because unlike the first pattern where you had 2 pieces per glove, this pattern will be cut on the fold. And then do the same for each finger. If your fingers taper away from each other, let them and straighten each side accordingly. And finally, do the same for the outer edge. It's okay if your straight line cuts through any rounded parts of your tracing because the fabric will stretch over those lumps. Shut up. Now mark where your thumb sticks out from your palm. They should be about 3 inches apart. It depends on the size of your thumb. Then mark 1/4 of an inch from the edge of your pattern and draw a parallel line, and then a second parallel line about 1 inch away from this one. Round off the corners and you've got your thumb opening. Then at the wrist and where you want the glove to end, add half your total wrist and arm measurements. As you did in the other pattern, you'll need to shorten your fingers to compensate for the stretch of the fabric by about 3/4 of an inch. Now you can cut out your glove pattern, leaving the thumb. Speaking of, it's now time to draft our thumb pattern. Start by truing up the outside edge of the thumb and smoothing out the inside curves. Cut this shape out and place it on the fold of another piece of paper and trace the curved edge. Now we need to draw the bottom curve of our thumb pattern. I am sure there's some math to help you create the bottom curve, but I was never good at math, so I just eyeball it. Look at the palm of your hand to get a sense of how deep a curve you'll need. Remember, we're using stretch fabric here, so it doesn't have to be exact. Now, to save heartache, once you've drawn that curve at the bottom of the thumb pattern, measure the outside edge with a tape measure. It's okay if the bottom of your thumb pattern is a touch smaller than the opening on the glove because it's stretched and you can stretch it to fit, but not too small. I'd say anything smaller than 1/4 of an inch is too small. You don't want your thumb hole to pucker. You heard me. With that in mind, you definitely don't want your thumb pattern to be bigger than the hole either because it'll make for a baggy thumb, and who wants that? How do you adjust your pattern pieces so they match? Well, you can either make the curve at the bottom of the thumb pattern wider to enlarge it, or you can lengthen or widen the size of the hole on the glove pattern, whatever works best for you. Finally, we need finger gussets. Gussets help the glove fit better where the fingers meet. It also negates the need to add seam allowance to the pattern along the fingers. Traditional glove patterns have 3 gussets, 1 for each pair of fingers. I make 1 long gusset for all the fingers. I just find it less fussy to sew. I do this by measuring along the fingers from the index top to the top of the pinky. Then I use my ruler to draw out a straight line about 1 inch longer than required, and then a parallel line about 5/8 of an inch to create 1 long, narrow rectangle. There. That's the 3 pattern pieces you'll need to make these gloves. Let's cut them out. Again, I cut these gloves on the diagonal, but unlike the other pair where I placed the pattern where I wanted it, this pattern needs to be placed on the fold. Pin this in place and cut out the pattern. Repeat this for the other glove. Now, this is important. Before we cut out the thumb hole, we need to unpin the pattern pieces and open them up, laying them right sides together. Pin the pattern back down along the outside edge and pin it around the thumb hole and cut it out. If you forget to do this and you cut the thumb hole on the fold, you'll end up with 2 openings per glove, which isn't good. Unless, of course, you have 2 thumbs. I'm not judging. Now, cut out the thumb pattern. You won't be able to match up this pattern piece to the body of the glove, so don't try. It'll just make you crazy. For the gusset with this fabric pattern, you can either cut it along a stripe so you've got 1 color, or you can cut it across the stripes so that you have a variety. Personally, I cut it along a stripe because 1 stripe on this particular pattern of fabric was exactly twice as wide as my gusset pattern, which meant I didn't need to pin anything. Why complicate things? So the first thing you want to do is sew and attach the thumbs. It's easier to attach the thumbs when the fingers aren't sewn because the body of the glove isn't closed off. Now there's no left or right thumb, so there's no fear of mixing them up. Just remember to sew them to the body of the glove right sides together. Trust me, you don't want inside out thumbs where your gloves are concerned. To make sure I place the gloves properly, what I do is on the fold, I do a small clip at the base of the thumb on the curve, and then I fold the opening of the glove in half and do a clip at the top and the bottom. This way I can pin the top of the thumb to the top of the opening and match up the clip I did at the bottom of the thumb to the bottom of the opening. That way it should match perfectly. You don't need to baste the thumb to the glove because this is fairly simple, but if you're nervous about sewing your fabric that close to the edge, totally baste it. Now it's time to sew on the gussets. Full disclosure, this will be fussy because you need to sew this close to the edge of the fabric. So To help minimize the frustration and the urge to kill, baste the gusset to the fingers. This in itself can be fussy if you're not used to hand sewing. Start by basting the first half of the index finger closed on the fold at the top of the index finger. Then tuck in the gusset on the fold between the two layers. You may want to use a pin to make sure it's as close to the seam as possible. See what I meant by fussy? Now start basting the gusset along the edge of the fingers. You want to stay as close to the edge of the fabric as possible while still catching both layers with the thread. Aim for it to be about 1/8 of an inch at most. When you get to where the fingers meet, you want to let the point of the fabric dip down a little bit into the body of the gusset. This will give you a spot to clip for turning later. Again, fussy. Do this along all fingers till you get to the top of the pinky. There, you're halfway done. Repeat this with the other glove and then sew along your basting line, keeping to the inside of the glove so the hand stitches won't show up in the finished product. Now baste the other side of the glove to the other edge of the gusset, taking care to make sure the fork of the fingers attach in the same point on the other side of the gusset. Fussy, who said that? When you get to the pinky, baste the gusset to the point where you meet up with the other stitches on the other side of the pattern. Sandwich the gusset between these two sides and baste along the outside edge of the pinky. Now, sew. I'm not going to lie to you, this is annoying. Don't feel you have to sew this all in one go. In fact, it's absolutely acceptable to hand sew the top curve of each finger as long as you use short stitches so the fabric doesn't gape. The tops of the fingers aren't a stress point like where the fingers join the hand, so sewing this short distance without a stretch stitch is going to be fine. Now finish by sewing down the outside edge of the glove and then hem at 1/2 inch total. And we're done! Not too shabby. This method took just over 3 hours for me to complete from paper to finished product, 3 times as long as the first style, and look at them side by side. At first glance, there's very little difference. Also, adding nails and sparkles to the gloves can help distract from wonky seams or any fit issues. If this is your first time sewing a project, you might want to start with a pair using this method first. Trust me, being able to finish a pair of gloves this way will give you the strength and courage to tackle the second method. Seriously. Trust me, as fussy as this may be the first time, it actually gets easier the more times you make gloves. And there we are, gloves for everyone. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Let me know if you tried to make a pair of gloves for yourself and which pattern you went with. If you came across any hiccups, let me know in the description box and I'll do my best to help you through it. If you found this tutorial helpful, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss the next tutorial. Speaking of the next one, is there something you'd like to see a tutorial on? Let me know down in the comments. While you're down there, check out the links for ways to support the Fingerdoo review. There's my Redbubble store where you can get some fabulous Wilma merch, a link to my Patreon page where the Fingerdoo family meet for a live chat twice a month, and finally, there's a link to my PayPal if you'd like to leave an old school tipper-doo. Of course, you can also use the YouTube thanks button, which is located just below this screen. Until next time, stay healthy, stay happy, and sew something. Miss me? Mwah! Seriously.